Thank you all. So my name is Rachel Uwase. I work for the International Committee of the Red Cross, and I'm in charge of humanitarian negotiations and conferences, and I'm in charge of the humanitarian, which has a little bit weird name, but it has an explanation. So I'm here to make a very short presentation about what is the humanitarian, what do we do within the humanitarian in the ICRC, and right after me, the Deputy Head of Delegation of the ICRC will give his opening and welcoming remarks. And after that, we'll have our moderator to guide us and we'll listen to our panelists through all the discussions. I hope you all will enjoy the evening. I'm waiting to come back in front of you. So, without taking much of your time, the humanitarian, as you can see, it's in 5 locations. The first one is in Geneva, the humanitarian in Kigali. The name that you cannot read is in Russia, and then the humanitarian in UAE, and then humanitarian itinerant, which is in West Africa. What and why introducing the humanitarian? The humanitarian was launched in Geneva to promote a common and open dialogue. We realized that we are a humanitarian organization and there is need to discuss humanitarian issues and to come up with solutions, policies, and also anytime we want to discuss and to come up with solutions in different contexts. And then in some countries, in some contexts, in the 5 places, it's a space, it's an established space. In Geneva and in Moscow specifically, they have halls for that. In the other 3 locations, we get to rent places like the Marriott to have people be more free and open to ask questions and discuss humanitarian issues. But we hopefully in the future, we will have the space to do so. And then the humanitarian model, as I see, it shapes the humanitarian debates. We engage with experts. We connect, we have networking cocktails, we get to invite people, we get to have you to talk to each other and get to know each other through the humanitarian. We get to have global and local conversation. We might probably not have specifically the issue that we discuss in Rwanda, but that might be in the region, might be a global issue that people who are in Rwanda can have a solution for, can shape a policy for, or can push along for. It generates ideas and solutions, as I said, and it is an open dialogue. We do focus on this because most of the time when you talk about the ICRC as an international humanitarian organization, you might feel like not saying something or you might feel like not wanting to offend people. That's why we make it in a public space so that you feel open and you can give your opinion and points anytime as you can. These are the locations, as you can see in the map. And it's not that these locations are the most peaceful in the world to have the humanitarian, but they're chosen for one reason. And we believe that Rwanda as a country is one country that has positioned itself as an influencer in the region and globally. Hence, we believe that people who gather together can come up with solutions in the country of Rwanda. So that is in short the humanitarian, and this is the 6th of it for this year in Rwanda, and we intend to have 2 more before the end of the year. And before the end of this year, we'll give you the whole calendar for next year. So thank you so much. Without taking much of your time, I'd like to welcome Mr. Makram Swat, the Deputy Head of Delegation for the ICRC, to give his remarks. Thank you.
Excellency, ambassadors and representatives of the diplomatic community, institution representatives, experts and lecturers, members of the panel, as well ladies and gentlemen, and I'm happy to welcome all of the youth with us tonight. Thank you all for being here. It is a pleasure, of course, and an honor for me to welcome you for this event. As Rachel mentioned, it is the 7th in total, but actually it's the 4th for this year, 2019, that were preceded with one on women in war, one on migration, one on the applicability and the challenges of IHL in modern warfare, and today we were talking about the digital era. The Kigali Humanitarian, as presented, is a platform launched by the ICRC exactly in December 2017. So it is our 3rd year for this humanitarian, with the objective of promoting and facilitating dialogue and on international humanitarian law, of course, but as well as the challenges that are faced by the civilian population living through armed conflict and violence. Although the perspective expected for tonight is to have a regional perspective on the topic of our discussion. It is absolutely today, if we talk about data, if we talk about protection of data, if we talk about what it means that every one of us is holding their phones all the time, it is a global issue. As all we know, the recent wave of digitalization provides new opportunities. Of course, they are opportunities, but at the same time, they come with increasing challenges. The question is how in the humanitarian sector we manage to use these opportunities, to use this technology, to use this data, while thinking and remaining committed to the principle of do no harm when we're dealing with data. The experts composing of our panel today will guide us around some of these questions. What is metadata? What does it mean? Why it does matter to know about this? How can they be harmful to the population what we are trying to help? And most importantly, how can the humanitarian sector again remain committed to do no harm when we carry out our activities? While answering these questions from a humanitarian perspective, we'll have also the opportunity to listen to the specific measures adopted by the government of Rwanda and how the country is handling the challenges that comes with protecting people against the misuse of their data. Taking keenly note of the ambition of the government of Rwanda to set the agenda on regionally and globally important issues and humanitarian challenges, we are happy to host this important event for us in Kigali today, and I really look forward to listen and learn from our distinguished guests. Without taking more of your time, I thank you again for being here and wish you enjoy the dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Makram. Sorry for the inconveniences, we had to remove the chair for the projection. I'd like to welcome Mrs. Fiona Mbabazi, our moderator for tonight, to welcome our panelists, and we can kick off the discussion. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Fiona Mbabazi. I'm a journalist by profession, and I'll be a moderator for the day as we try to discuss more the challenges, the way forward, and what we need to do, especially with the solutions when it comes to data, metadata, protection. I'm also here to learn all about this. So to help me break this down for everyone, I'd like to welcome my panelists. I'd like to start with Mr. Innocent Muhizi, who is, of course, the CEO of RISA, which is the Rwanda Information Society Authority. And also, for the sake of being gender balanced, I'll go straight to Ms. Tina, who is working on community engagement and accountability in the ICRC. Last but not least, Mr. Michael Adran, who is the cash-based intervention CBI officer at the UNHCR here in Kigali, Rwanda. Thank you very much. So, Tina, I'll hand over the microphone to you to start. Thank you.
I told Fiona that if I didn't explain metadata well by the end of today, you could all throw things at me at the end of the session. So I'm actually going to stand up, if you don't mind, because I have a flipboard and I have annoying interactive exercises. So before we start, I wanted to ask everyone in the room what comes to their mind when they hear the word digital risks. And being toward you, I am a preschool teacher now, so if you don't volunteer an answer, I will pick on you to make you provide an answer. So, anyone, what comes to your mind when you hear the word digital risk? Hacking, okay.
Privacy at large.
Privacy.
Misuse of data.
Misuse of data.
Selling of data.
Selling of data. Sorry?
The global data protection.
Oh, okay, yes. Anything else?
Well, it's personal security as well.
Personal security. You've got an expression that the American president likes to use a lot as well, which is somewhat linked to digital risks. Fake news, misinformation, yes? Privacy violations. So all of these things, all of these digital risks, they require that a little bit of information be obtained about you first. So if you're going to see an advertisement online, that website first has to know a little bit about you to profile you as someone who would be interested in that advertisement. or if you see misinformation on social media or on a messaging app, the reason that this misinformation is going viral is because they know this content will be popular. And they know it will be popular because they've profiled a little bit the users on that social media or on that messaging app. So what I want to focus on today, as Fiona mentioned, is how we gather this information about you and how we do it legally. Because obviously you can be hacked. People can access your personal or private information, your banking details, but there are also very legal ways that information is gathered from you every single day. And one of those ways is metadata. So I actually need 2 volunteers, if you don't mind, to come up to the stage. And again, if you don't volunteer, I will pick on you based on who has the nicest shirt. So, anyone. So, there's information about you that shouldn't be shared. So your bank account details, I assume most of you assume that your bank will not be sharing those. Or information that you know, the messages you send on social media, the emails you send, normally those are protected by law. But again, there's information that is not as well protected. And it's what I'm going to try and demonstrate here. So I'm going to ask you to take this sticky note, and you're going to write a message to this person over here. And when you're done writing, you're going to fold it up and give it to me. So I'm not looking at what he's writing, because I'm legally not allowed to. Yeah. So this is a text message that is going to be sending to Claire. So Inge-san is sending a text message to Claire. But to send the text message, it has to go on the mobile network. But I control the mobile network because I am Orange or MTN or Vodafone. I'm a mobile network service provider. So I'm not allowed to look at what's inside this text message because in most countries the law prevents me from looking at what's inside the content of his communications. But in order to send this to Claire, I need to know where the message is coming from, which phone, so I know his phone number. And then I need to know where the message is going, so I need to know her phone number. And then I also need to know at what time he sent it, so I'm able to deliver it to her on time. And also because I'm carrying this, I know the size as well. So, there you have this message. And so this might not seem like a very big deal, but if you think about it, because I carried this message, I know at what time he's awake. I know when he's awake and texting. Maybe he sends messages to Claire a lot, especially in the evening. He sends her like 50 or 100 messages. And then one day they stop. So I can assume that maybe, they were close friends, and then maybe they got into a fight and they're no longer texting anymore. And so this information is called metadata. It's information about your communications. It's not the stuff that is usually protected, so what you write in your emails or what you write in your text messages. It's information about that, the time you sent it, where you sent it from. And it doesn't concern only text messages. Every time you make a bank transaction online, your bank doesn't necessarily know what you bought, but they know where you bought it. They know at what time, they know what amount, and based on that, they can know things like what your favorite coffee place is, or they know that you have a really serious Amazon addiction and you need to stop shopping at 2 in the morning. It can also cover things like when you're online, if you spend a lot of time looking at an image on a website. So it won't know what you're doing on that website, but it'll say, we noticed they spent a lot of time looking at this particular part of the website. So, you're thinking, okay, well, if my internet service provider or if my mobile service provider knows this about me, I don't really care. It's just one company. It's not a big deal. But I have another exercise. No, you have to staying out. So, when Innocent sends the text message, I was being the service provider for, let's say you're in a country called, I ICRC land. So you're in ICRC land, and the domestic telecommunications provider knows about your text message. So you've got one actor who knows about when you're awake, who do you text a lot, do you text your family a lot, your friends, etc. What you don't know is that I actually have a bunch of partners in other countries. I'm part of a larger global corporation. So there are also foreign telecom networks who also know when you wake up and whether or not you text your family a lot, or whether or not you and Claire were good friends and then weren't such good friends anymore. So obviously, I'm in ICRC land, so if ever there's a concern about you, or if the law allows it, the courts in my country might be able to access information about your phone records. But again, because I have partners in other countries, then the foreign judiciaries can also know about all this information about you. Now let's say you weren't just sending Claire a message, maybe you were wiring money to her, in which case your bank knows about it. But your bank is also, like most banks, has partners in other countries, so they also know about it. And maybe the banks that are partners with your banks are not in the same countries as the telecom networks that are partners with your telecom network. So you have even more foreign judiciaries who might know about it. In every government, there's a thing called the Financial Intelligence Unit. They also tend to monitor bank transactions in case there's anything suspicious. So maybe what you sent Claire was a bit suspicious, so your domestic FIU knows about it. But maybe ICRC land has an intelligence agreement with other countries, like Europol or Interpol, who tend to share data on this kind of stuff. So foreign FIUs also know about it. And maybe you sent her money not through SMS, but through an application. So I don't know if there are any applications here that are used to wire money. My sister uses something called Layel. So this private third party also knows about your transaction. But this application is actually developed by a web developer who has a bunch of other applications and other partners. So they also know. And these third parties can also be located in countries that are different countries than where your bank was located or where your partner telecom networks were located. So a lot of people know.
One more.
One more?
Could be hosted in a completely different other country.
Yes. So if ICRC land doesn't have a lot of server capacity, they can decide that all of these communications are going to be hosted in a server in another country, and so they also have access to this information. And it's sort of everyone's responsibility to educate themselves about what you should put on your text messages, on your email. But obviously, in the area where the ICRC works, people who are running for their lives, who are crossing borders, who are signing up for cash transfer programs, they don't really have the luxury of educating themselves about what they should or should do. Or maybe they know really well that they're putting themselves at risk, but they have no choice but to sign up to a cash transfer program. And maybe they don't know that the information about that program is shared with banks later, and that means that they could be refused for loans. So my point today was to kind of introduce the topic. I hope that I've clarified what metadata is to everyone, otherwise throw things at me. And I'll now hand over to my colleagues who will provide more detail on the policy and on some specific case studies related to Rwanda.
There's a time you use Facebook and you realize they suggest a friend, that friend suggestion. But that is someone maybe you just met or just texted and said, oh, hi, that's my number. Oh, yeah, it was nice meeting you this evening. Then all of a sudden, Facebook is actually suggesting that this can be your friend. Do you get that? So maybe that's what... I just go straight to innocent. How protected are we? I really want to know. I'm scared at this point.
So, way back in the days, I worked for an organization, and so there were refugees. Okay? So first of all, they had to be registered. So this meant that there's this organization that had to register them. Okay? Now, you are picking their details, household names, IDs that were given, pictures and everything, and then you store this into a system somewhere. So that they can be served, be given food rations and stuff like that. This data had to be shared with another organization. Okay? So now you have two organizations that have this piece of information about these particular refugees. Okay, now you had to give them SIM cards. So there's another third organization that now has a bit of information about them. Okay, now you had to transfer money to them via some mobile application. So there is an application developer here that Atina explained. They had to send money via a telecom network. In this case, there were actually 3 telecom networks, and they were all in different countries. Exactly what she was talking about. Okay, and you had, here I've just tried to simplify it. There were about 3 different systems that you had to interconnect in between here. Okay, and yes, like Shwede put, you had a number of developers or system administrators who were sitting in different jurisdictions, different continents that who knew exactly when the refugees get money, who knew exactly how much money was being transferred to that particular country, knew exactly how many refugees were there, and you could be able to say on a monthly basis, this is the amount of money that is going to that particular region, in that particular country. If anyone could be able to land on this information, that would be something they'll say, you know what, there's some juice over there, let's just go and do that. Now, the program was a little bit advanced in the sense that actually you had to receive cash, you actually go and buy your grocery store stuff, food and other things that you needed to use. So there were actually merchants that they were buying from, a number of them. Now, somehow a system would have a hitch, and they would be able to get merchandise without actually transferring the payment. So now actually that became a default. So they owed money to these merchants. Okay? Now, they didn't want to pay up to the point where actually authorities had to go after them. Now, you are in a humanitarian situation. Now you have authorities going after refugees to ask them to pay. Okay? Now, if these were people who you wanted later on to get into your mainstream banking system, these are already defaulters. These ones cannot be allowed into the banking system. So these actually go on the credit reference bureaus and the credit scoring engines. Then those ones will never ever get any loan facility or anything. So actually, this is a big issue. It's a real issue. It's a real threat to us, especially in the humanitarian space, and it's here with us wherever you go. Now, back to the question: how protected are we? No one will ever lie to you that they are protected 100%, because it does not exist. Not even NASA, not even the biggest organizations that you can think about in the whole world have been hacked. SWIFT, the global money transfer system was hit for about $85 million, I think around 2013, 2014, thereabout, in Bangladesh. Big corporations like big banks in the US, all over the world, have been hacked. So the issue of security is relative. But what we've done in Rwanda, we've put in place a number of one, policies. You have a cybersecurity policy in place. And to be able to make sure that you're protecting citizens' data, you do it through different entities that are regulated. For example, in the financial services sector, they have their set of regulations they have to abide by. And if there's any suspicion, they have a report they submit to the Financial Investigations Unit within the central bank. The telecom operators do the same. They have specific license obligations they have to abide by. So what we're doing now in the public sector is also to mandate different government institutions to make sure they have security mechanisms. So that's at the policy level. But now down into the nitty-gritties of how we try to do it, we set systems in place. And for example, have passwords, firewalls, cybersecurity engines, intrusion detection systems and prevention systems. So each individual institution has to set up that, and then of course you have to make sure that you do continuous assessment and penetration testing and vulnerability assessment to see how secure you are. Now, that does not stop things to happen, and there are those that are intentional and they are considered a crime. So what the government has done has put in place a cybercrime law that enables and gives instruments to prosecute the wrongdoers. But of course, it's a global village now. Some instances it becomes really difficult to know where do you draw your boundaries, because if somebody goes on Facebook and commits a crime on Facebook, how are you going to prosecute that? But first of all, will you know where that person is? And if you do you have jurisdictional competencies to go and prosecute that person? So yes, there's work that is being done, but the challenge is big. But of course, we try to do as much as we can. But also the other key and very important aspect of what we do on a regular basis is citizen sensitization. How do you educate your citizens so that they are able to understand the risks, and how do you ensure that at least they try to help themselves by mitigating against these risks? Thank you.
Before you put down the microphone, maybe to enlighten us more about the Rwanda, the new law that Rwanda is trying to push, especially the personal data protection. How is it going to help us? Will it even help saving the refugees? Will it concern everyone? Is it everyone, or is it limited to particular people?
What we're working on is a personal data protection law. What we have today is what is called the data revolution policy, which is not actually a legal instrument that you can use to prosecute. Yes, when it is in place, it will be for everybody. It will be for every citizen who lives in Rwanda. And it will address today, if my information, my data, is used by a restaurant, for example, and as a result of that data that is compromised through that restaurant, I get infringed in one way or another. What recourse do I have? There is none. So other than if it was stolen, then you can be able to identify who stole it in some defined manner, but other than that, there is no recourse. So what that is going to do is to be able to ensure that, yes, if I give you my data, my information, you have an obligation to make sure that you protect it and make sure that it is safe. And I think somebody mentioned the GDPR, Global Data Protection Regulation. That is what it does. This is only for the European citizens. What it says is that every European citizen's data, if you're holding it, if you're storing it, if you're processing it, you have an obligation to make sure that that data is safe. If they want that data to be erased, yes, you have to erase it. They have a right to be forgotten. And if that data is breached in one or another, it can get to a fine of, I think, something like $20 million or thereabout, or 4% of your company's total turnover, or $20 million, or whatever is higher. some very ridiculous amount of money like that.
Thank you. Michael, you've been in this field of cash transfers for quite a while now, yes? My question would be then, how do you ensure that, these people, the citizens, are actually protected? I have seen, being a journalist, I've seen stories where they say, for example, Al-Shabaab sends money to Dadaab, right, through Somalia, and the money is eventually used in other ways, that's not right for the society. So how do you ensure that first the money is used, or rather it's in the safe hands, in the right hands for the, because right now I'm looking at an example where most of the refugees are not educated, They probably have someone else who signs the money for them, or someone else receives this money. What are the challenges that you see or you come across every day, and how do you deal with them?
Okay. Thank you. But I like what Innocence depicted here, because basically is exactly the challenges that we are going through. You see, this person here sends to this organization here. This organization has like 6, 7, 8 functional units who will keep requesting further information from here. Different capacity. And same goes for all these other areas. Now, we are accountable to our donors. We are accountable to those who give us the money for the assistance. Now, for you to demonstrate that you're meeting your objectives, you need to do monitoring. Now, when we started humanitarian assistance a long time ago, we had very simple mechanisms in kind, which was very easy to monitor because you have received or not. Yes? Then we moved into cash assistance, which has got myriad of advantages. And in the cash assistance, so before we had paper vouchers, direct cash, all these methods. And we are now becoming more and more advanced. We have digital ways of disbursing cash, trying to cope with the digital world. And this has a price to pay when it comes to monitoring. Because if you then provide assistance through mobile money, now, what information do you need to demonstrate that the beneficiary has received, has used the assistance for the specific purpose that you wanted them to use it for, received the assistance when they were supposed to use it for? You have to get a lot of data. And a lot of this data infringes right into the beneficiary's personal ways of using the assistance. You will need to get, for example, for mobile money, you will need to get a merchant report showing you how many beneficiaries went to this merchant to run what, like was mentioned before. You will need to get when the last transaction was done. You will need to get probably how much was transacted, what's the balance in the wallet. This is a lot of information. But when you think about it, if it was you, then you would not be happy if this information is actually being shared about you. So that is one real-time challenge. When it comes to the monitoring and demonstrating, the higher we go, even if we're using bank accounts, is the same. So we have standard operating procedures which say, okay, if you do not use your assistance within 3 months, you don't need it. Or within 6 months, we don't need it. You don't need it. So we recall it back. But what do we need to recall that money back? Because the central bank is very clear that there has to be consent before the money is recalled back. So you still need to look at the transaction reports. You still need to look at the nitty-gritties of what the beneficiary is doing. So for me, I think it is time also that we move into trying to find out secure methods, not only of the disbursement, but also of the reconciliation. Because monitoring forms, reconciliation forms a very big part of monitoring. And that is one area where we are having big details, everything about 150,000 refugees. That is a lot of information. How do we ensure that this information is secure? So we need to move towards more secure methods of reconciliation. We need to have access. For me, I think one golden way we can do that, when we have direct access to our financial service provider platforms, it could be viewer access, I don't know. It could be, but we have tried that, and it has worked for us brilliant. So the reconciliation is done within a system, within a closed system, such that the data does not trickle out to the various different organizations that would require is a me-to-me, person-to-person reconciliation. Yeah. So that is one major example I want to point out. And the other challenge is when we talk about digitalization, we talk about digital data. We want to, financial inclusion, we want to empower the beneficiaries. We want to ensure that they move along in the same speed with the local communities in terms of loans, all these benefits that it comes with the financial aspects. Now, for this to happen, back here, what information then do we need to collect? And probably I would throw the question back to the policymakers, because the amount of data collected here needs to be probably standardized. The documentation required for this registration for non-citizens needs to be clear. So that you don't have one financial service provider requesting for ABC, that this, according to the national guidelines, this is it. Another service provider requesting for a little less, yeah? So that is another area I feel we should really try to standardize as much as possible. If we could standardize the data that we need to collect from the beneficiaries during this registration, then it becomes much easier to secure the information.
My name is Jean Verguin, working with the International Committee of the Red Cross. And thank you very much for your presentation. It was very interesting. At the end of the day, I feel that I understood what is a metadata. Thank you, Tina. And my question is, okay, we are speaking about risk, but at the end of the day, what is the risk for the beneficiary to have these all this data somewhere in the network, in the cloud, but physically, or what's the risk for the beneficiary? For us, the risk of being on Facebook is to be known and to be shared by advertisement and things like that, but really for the IDP or for the refugee. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. Maybe another question?
My question is directed to Tina. Tina, I would first thank for the elaborative presentation. But again, as IRC, Humanity is mandated to protect the victim of wars. And sometimes those victims can be, as the colleague was saying, they can be also a victim of these Facebook's, social medias. As ICRC, what are the strategies are you doing to protect those victims? Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Claire. I'm with the UNFPA, and my question is really to anyone who feels that they want to try and chime in on it. What we are talking about with metadata is data about data. But what that primary data is of course evolving. And so right now we're talking about bank transactions, which used to be on paper, but now they're digital. What about when we start talking about fingerprints and biometrics and data that, of course, we aren't currently working with in a large scope, but as you said, Michael, standardization is important. So how will we do that looking forward rather than just reacting to the present? Thank you, all of you.
Thank you. Being futuristic right now. Yes.
My question goes to Innocent. I think you showed us the cycle of how the data can be not well managed, being shared by different organizations. But I would like to know if there is any law from the beneficiary of the protecting the data until every stage of the people that goes through this cycle that you are showing us. If there are laws of protecting the data through all that people, you can just let us know. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So one example actually wasn't with the ICRC, but there was a cash transfer set up in a country. And because cash transfers tend to focus on people who don't have needs just yet, it just so happened that the people who registered for this cash transfer were refugees and IDPs. And they received a notification that they had their cash through their phone. So because there were phone lists that were drawn up about who was receiving this cash, these people could be identified and they could be tracked. Wherever you go with your phone is always pinging the nearest cell tower, which is good. It's just to make sure that if you do make a call, you have the best possible signal. Before you could turn this off by removing your battery from your phone, but how many of you can remove your battery from your phone today? So, and they noticed in that country that I think it was on a seasonal basis, that there were movements of the people who were cash transfer recipients from one place to another, and a third party got access to that information, and they started to attack healthcare clinics and social work clinics to prevent those people from accessing those services. And it was part of a campaign of hatred against refugees and IDPs. So that's one concrete way. Another example, and this has happened in multiple contexts, there will be posts on social media announcing that there will be an attack on a camp imminently. Whether or not the attack occurs, it tends to produce a displacement, and in displacement you will have looting, you will often have instances of sexual violence and so on and so forth, and that is also a rumor that starts online. And the final risk, which maybe we don't talk about often, is it's something as silly as a software upgrade to our payment system. Imagine a context where there's very little trust or acceptance of the ICRC's work, and there are places like that. If there's a software update and for some reason we just don't have the IT staff who are able to cater to it, and so all of our payments are frozen, how much time until there are riots outside of the office? How much time until the legitimacy of the ICRC's work is questioned? Even things that don't have an ill intent, that could be as benign as, there was a software upgrade, you didn't catch up to it, and so your payments were frozen for a couple of weeks, can quickly have an impact on not only the safety of the people you want to serve, but also of your staff. So those are 3 examples, and in terms of what the ICRC is trying to do to address those, but there is obviously better investment in our online platforms. There's a really important discussion, which I'm not the best placed person to talk about it, but on the use of biometrics and whether or not that's something the ICRC wants to endorse or not, and if we do decide to move forward with collecting data, where do we host it? As you know, the ICRC has specific privileges and immunities, so we don't actually fall under a specific jurisdiction. And so a country cannot request that we provide data to them. And so there's a much larger discussion going on with much more important people than me on how do we store data securely, and what data do we refuse to store or we decide to destroy after a certain amount of time. And then obviously is a discussion on how do we start to integrate, misinformation and, when rumors circulate online about incoming attacks, how do we integrate that into the protection work that the ICRC already carries out? How do we try and help people to understand what are the pieces of themselves that they leave online? I'm out of words.
Thank you, Tina.
Thank you. Actually, I believe if no one has written a paper about it, I think somebody has to. There's a behavioral change when you start getting into some of these situations. And this has led to home violence in some of the refugees. Because initially, the support was in kind. So it's food, and food is there. And in most cases, in some of the countries that I've seen, if there's someone who is registered to receive the cash payment in digital form, it's the head of the household. And in most cases, the head of the household is a man. And if that's the case, this guy might decide, you know what, if I received 10,000, I'll buy food for 3,000, and the other I'll go have a drink. Okay, and that leads to, kids are going to starve, and this guy is going to come home drunk, and that is going to lead to other issues. So to answer your question, yes, there are physical security issues as a result of some of these situations. And then the list actually is quite long. It could go on to a number of, if somebody is able to learn onto that data and see, someone might not even be interested in money. Somebody might be interested in actually recruiting the young people in those camps to use them in wars, to wage guerrilla rebels and stuff like that. So if they're able to understand, these are the demographics of the people in those particular camps, then this is a good target for me to go and recruit. So the real security issues are very many and immense. Now, yes, there are roles each and every player has to play at every level. In terms of technical situations, there are basic controls that you can put in place, especially if you're dealing with financial services. There are maker checker processes, there are encryption protocols that you can deploy on some of the systems. You can encrypt the entire tunnel, you can encrypt the data that is transversing through these networks, and control at every level. I think what Michael's talking about is very pertinent. Reports, reconciliation reports, to make sure that what is being done is the right thing. So, yes, and at majority of some of the players here are regulated entities. So how do you hold them accountable to making sure that the data that they hold on customers or citizens is not breached or is not violated? So yes, there are telecom operators, software developers, banks, financial institutions, each and every party, government institutions or international organizations, NGOs. Everyone has a big role to play, and but the key thing is how do you police that? How do you ensure that whoever has to play a particular role actually plays that role? And I think that's what I was referring to in terms of monitoring and evaluation, ensure that everybody plays their part.
Yeah, maybe just also to add a little something. Yes, there is huge risk on the beneficiaries. Huge risk when this data is misappropriated, is misused, is lost in any way. But let's also not forget there is equally a huge risk for the agencies, for the parent agencies. I could probably point a scenario, an example, back home. We had issues where we were providing cash assistance to a particular people of concern, And immediately after the cash assistance, the people of concern would rush across the border, and you would actually see, and there would be reports from across the border of increase in procurement of guns, of procurement of firearms, and anyone would want to link that to the cash assistance, because then the data, when they get hold of information that they're not supposed to get hold, it has also impact on the image of the institution. Yeah.
Before you put the microphone down, then it comes. My question then would be education. Do you take time to educate them? How does it work? Because I'm imagining if I've never held a phone before and say I'm using mobile money, do you educate them? Do they know that maybe I need an identity card or household partner? How does it work?
Yeah, I think it's not only about education. So one way of mitigating this is actually during the contracting. When you're getting into your agreement with your financial service provider, this needs to be captured. You have to have a very clear idea of the financial literacy of your population of concern. But more important, and what we have learned with experience, is it has to be three-way. You have to include the regulator. For example, you would need to include the National Bank of Rwanda. You would need to find out from the National Bank of Rwanda what is acceptable in terms of information that I need. How far can I go in looking into accounts of the beneficiaries? What and what and what? And of course, they would guide you. They would pose questions like, what do you need this information for? And this then would guide you in your contracting with your financial service, which will include the component of training, the component of ensuring that they understand what is expected of them. And back to the question on fingerprinting and biometrics, yeah, that's a huge one. That's really, really a tough one. And, in some states, we have government not authorizing any other body to capture biometrics other than government, which probably sometimes works well. We probably need to come up with a way forward as well, and agree that, okay, if it is for the refugees, then XCR capture biometric data, and whom you will need to share this data to also needs to be very clear. Yeah. So that conversation needs to happen.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. Maybe before this summer, you want to chip in?
Let me add on something here. I think we painted a very, very scary and gloomy picture here. Yes, it is quite serious. But again, when you look at the benefits of what the digital era has brought, you cannot compare. It's immense. And actually, we are yet to see much, much more benefits coming as a result of this. And I think with the emerging technologies, there are actual solutions to mitigate some of the challenges here. One of the techniques that is used has been around for quite some time, is something that's called tokenization and data anonymization. After that very fast registration, then you anonymize data, you tokenize it, and then whatever goes through all these networks is just a hash of numbers that even if you landed on it, you will not be able to make sense out of it. So these are some of the techniques that have been around and actually being taken to another level. We have the emergence of artificial intelligence that is going to be able to actually take it even to another level. We have some of the solutions that are based on blockchain technology that can be able to address some of the security concerns in terms of fraud or money being lost, or altering some of these transactions. So actually, for us who are in the technology space, it's very exciting. I mean, this is something that we thrive on. We see some of the things. We face a challenge, like, okay, how do I tackle this? For example, the fingerprinting and stuff like that, we actually think of how you take it even further to your iris and other solutions. Right now, not only about humanitarian situations, even the standard citizens who are in very developed cities, actually they have deployed all sorts of cameras around cities where they pick your faces and they start to use that. Actually, that very soon we are getting to a situation where countries might not even need to have border post controls and passport control and stuff like this, where all they need is just to have your face, and then they'll be able to run it into their huge databases. They'll be able to say, Innocent is a credible citizen, he has a valid passport from Rwanda, therefore he can be allowed to come into this country. Or say, there's something we are not quite sure about Innocent, therefore let's actually ask him. You understand? When you see other people passing and then say, Innocent, you want to come here. So these are some of the exciting times that we see ahead of us, and it should not sound like it's a gloomy situation and then it's all boom. No, there's actually exciting stuff that we are seeing, and I think we'll be able to, if we capitalize on these technologies, we'll be able to address some of these challenges that we encounter. Thank you.
Yeah, facial recognition is great until plastic surgery happens. I just wanted to come back to Claire, what you had said, because yes, there is a part about educating people about the risks we expose them to, but there's also a part about listening better to some of the risks that are mentioned by people who come to humanitarian agencies. I mean, Syrian refugees were the first to actually refuse registration at camps because they refused to share their data because they had a history of, my data was shared with XYZ actor and it led to me being put at risk. And when it comes to fingerprints, I think that the discussion on biometrics is, and I don't know how this is happening, it's happening completely separately to reports in Europe where migrants have been burning their fingers in Malta for years to avoid the Dublin regulations. And so I wonder why there's no conversation about, as we roll out biometrics, I'm really sorry, I know you really wanted to have a happy picture at the end, but why we're not looking at, the people we serve have an agency of their own, and if they refuse to provide biometrics, they will sort of announce the doomsday of humanitarian aid. So I think there has to also be a better listening of what people tell us and taking it to account their own agency and the data they decide to share with us or not.
Thank you. Before we wrap up, any more questions? Yes, sure.
No, thank you very much. I've learned a lot and got more curious about the topic. And I have a couple of questions. I would like to come back to the education. Based on your knowledge, I'm talking to both of you, do you consider that the humanitarians really today taking enough time to explain to these people that are benefiting from humanitarian assistance to know what you explained to us and to have the choice to opt out? That's the question. Because yes, the freedom of choice should be based on information and knowledge of what are the risks. And I have a question to Ines. Take into consideration that humanitarian, they manage all of this data today. They're not the server owners. They're not the law providers. Do you think that from your perspective, there is enough discussion between states and humanitarians to address these issues? And yes, it is a positive, and we should end by positive. I go back to Fiona, as you said, although everything we heard about data and Facebook, we still continue because we think it is useful. Now, how we can use it better is the issue.
I don't think there's enough conversation happening between the humanitarian and the international organizations and the states. Actually, in some instances, you find that there is a point of contentions and some form of contentions. And I think that is actually detrimental to the very people that they want to protect. So I think that conversation has to take place and has to be real. It has to be able to make sure that they have a common understanding and a common view of own data for this particular people of concern that they are trying to protect. And number two, there have to be a uniform process of how that data is going to be stored and processed. What we have data amalgamation all over the place. For find that I have 40, 50 different innocents that are scattered in different systems across the whole country with different organizations and institutions, and that makes it even more risky. So, but if you adopt, and I think there's only one country so far in the whole world that has adopted that, you know, store once policy. If I've registered my ID with the National ID Agency, then no any other organization is allowed to store my ID. They can consult it and confirm that that is my ID, but they don't store it anywhere else. That is Estonia. So I think if we're able to get to that point, I think it will help us solve a lot of issues, but that conversation has to take place. It has to be able to revolve around the issues they're trying to protect.
On your first question, I can't really speak for all of the humanitarian sector and say that we spend enough time with people we serve to explain the risks. I think the issue is even where we do explain to someone specifically what data they're providing us with, where it'll be hosted, if they say no, we don't usually have a recourse ready. If someone says, I don't want to be part of this cash transfer program because I'm afraid of being blacklisted later by a bank, I've rarely seen an organization say, oh, well, that's okay, you can still opt for this offline program that we still have. So I think that even, educating or providing information for the sake of informed consent is meaningless if you don't then provide an alternative for the person.
Yeah, thank you for the questions. And just to add on what my panelists have also said, for your second question, I think it's also very important, in addition to what Innocent has said, for us also to constantly look in, and I mean constantly, continuously look in the strategic level partners, the policy makers, the national policy makers, the RURA, the Bank of Rwanda. Yeah. It really adds value into the programming. When you're talking about all these data issues and data protection issues, they will always give a strategic eye on what is, and it helps a lot in guiding our programs. For the first question, maybe I want to mention an example, and yes, you're right. There is still plenty to be done. There's a lot that needs to be done in terms of beneficiary communication. We have just jointly with WFP developed a module on financial inclusivity and financial training for both the beneficiaries and other stakeholders like banking agents who are at the camps. And this is just a step towards trying to ensure that the communication is constantly being taken down to the grassroots level.